You land in Brazil, but forget the beaches, the bossa nova, or sipping acai under a parasol. The only thing greeting you here is a wall of heat that feels like it's breathing. Thick, wet, and angry. Your linen shirt sticks to your body. You're already swatting at insects the size of your thumb, and guess what? You haven't even made it past breakfast. Welcome to Colonial Brazil, 17th century edition. No soap, no salt, no mercy. You want to use the bathroom? That's a hole in the ground swarming with flies. Want lunch? It's bitter tea, cassava so hard it chips your tooth, and maybe a few beans. But don't expect seasoning. That's for export. And before you get too cozy in your air-conditioned timeline, do this. Like this video. Because if someone once carried 40 kilos of sugarcane barefoot under a noon sun, you can handle a click. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into history that school never dared to show you. And drop a comment below. What's the one modern comfort you'd beg for if you woke up in colonial Brazil? Because here the real predators walk on two legs, and survival, that's not a story, it's a daily ritual. So sit back, preferably in a chair that isn't made of termite-infested wood, and let's walk through 24 hours in a Brazil that was anything but tropical paradise. You arrive in Brazil, but not the one you know from travel magazines or postcards. There are no bustling beaches with vendors selling refreshing acai, no cheerful samba rhythms floating through the air. Instead, the first thing that envelops you is the heat. Not just hot, but alive and breathing. A suffocating steam rises from the earth, thick with buzzing insects carrying the scent of damp wood, perspiration, and something vaguely sweet, yet rotting. It's the 17th century, and the concept of deodorant is centuries away from being invented. Your linen shirt clings to your skin within moments, completely soaked through. There's no breeze, no ceiling fans, certainly no air conditioning, and absolutely no escape from this wall of humidity. Welcome to colonial Brazil, where simply making it through a single day tests the limits of human endurance. You wake up as the first light filters through cracks in wooden shutters. The room is simple, 4 walls of rough-hewn timber that haven't been sanded or finished. The floor beneath you creaks with every movement, announcing your awakening to the household. Your body aches from spending the night on what can hardly be called a mattress, just a canvas sack stuffed with straw and dried leaves. There's no pillow, just a small bundle of cloth you've fashioned yourself to cradle your head. The concept of a proper bathroom is non-existent here. Instead, there's a latrine, essentially a hole in the ground, located at a short distance from the main dwelling. It emanates a pungent odor that seems to hang in the thick air, impossible to ignore. And you'd better attend to your needs quickly, because the day starts with the sun. There's no leisurely stretching or pressing the snooze button. The sun doesn't rise with mercy in the tropics. It announces itself boldly, slashing through any opening like blades of golden fire. Outside, the world is already humming with activity. Not with the life you're accustomed to, but with the sounds of survival. Roosters crow, children's voices call out, and work tools clank against stone and wood as the settlement comes to life. Forget your morning coffee with milk or a quick bowl of cereal. Your breakfast is a piece of cassava bread, slightly stale, dense, and with little flavor. It's accompanied by a thin, somewhat bitter tea made from local leaves you can't quite identify. Sugar? That's ironic. You're standing on land dedicated to growing sugarcane for export to Europe. Yet sweetener is a luxury few can afford here. The white gold that drives the colonial economy rarely sweetens the lives of those who harvest it. You chew the tough bread slowly, letting the bland substance soften in your mouth. It's filling, at least, providing the energy you'll need for the long day ahead. The tea helps wash it down, though its unfamiliar taste makes you long for the comforts of home. Don't expect to relax with your breakfast either. Your hands are already raw from the morning chores, carrying heavy wooden buckets of water from the nearby river, navigating a path where you must watch for snakes and swat away persistent swarms of mosquitoes. The water itself is murky, not the clear, filtered liquid you're accustomed to. You've learned to let it settle in the bucket before using it, allowing sand and debris to sink to the bottom. Still, it's never truly clean by your standards. You might think the primary dangers here would be dramatic encounters with wild animals or violent tropical storms. But the truth is more insidious. The real threat is invisible. Disease lurks everywhere in this unfamiliar environment. Bathing is a weekly luxury, not a daily necessity. Soap, when available, is rough and harsh on your skin, made from animal fat and lye. Most days you simply rinse off the worst of the grime and sweat, accepting that true cleanliness is impossible. The locals have developed impressive immune systems through generations of exposure to the regional bacteria and parasites. Your body, however, is an unwilling newcomer, not yet adapted to these microbes, and it protests with frequent stomach ailments. You've noticed how the people here chew certain herbs to numb toothaches. Dentistry as you know it doesn't exist. Pain relief comes from nature's pharmacy, or, in desperate cases, crude extractions using metal tools that make you shudder just thinking about them. The clothing you wear feels nothing like the comfortable fabrics you're used to. Your shirt is made of rough linen that scratches against your skin when dry and chafes when wet, which is most of the time in this humidity. Women wear long, heavy dresses regardless of the heat, with multiple layers that trap sweat against their bodies. Men don't fare much better, with thick trousers and shirts that offer protection from insects and scratchy vegetation at the cost of comfort. Footwear is a luxury many cannot afford. Those who can wear simple leather shoes that haven't been properly tanned or fitted. They rub blisters on your heels and between your toes, but going barefoot means exposing yourself to parasites that can burrow under your skin. Before you can worry too much about your appearance or comfort, a voice calls out, not gently but with authority. You're expected to join the daily labor. The social hierarchy here is rigid, with clear expectations for everyone according to their position. The fields await: sugarcane, manioc, tobacco, each crop demanding its own form of backbreaking work. The sun climbs higher, becoming a merciless overseer that watches your every move from above, beating down with unrelenting intensity. The tools feel primitive in your hands. Machetes with wooden handles worn smooth by generations of palms, hoes with metal heads that have been repeatedly repaired and resharpened. Nothing is wasted here. Everything is used until it literally falls apart. You bend, cut, and carry, then repeat. By midday, blisters have formed and burst in your palms, the tender skin underneath now exposed to dirt and plant fibers. You begin to understand a fundamental truth about this place. Colonial Brazil wasn't built for comfort. This land was shaped for extraction, of wealth, of labor, of resources. The colony exists not for those who live in it, but for distant powers that harvest its abundance. Everyone and everything here serves that purpose, whether willingly or by force. Around you, the social structure is as rigid as iron. The world is clearly divided. Portuguese administrators and landowners direct activities from horseback, their skin protected from the sun by wide-brimmed hats, and their status evident in their clean, imported clothing. The clergy move through the community in their distinctive attire, collars stiff despite the heat. Their authority derived from both crown and cross. They oversee not just spiritual matters but education, record-keeping, and often serve as intermediaries in disputes. Indigenous peoples whose ancestors have inhabited this land for millennia have been pushed to the margins of their own territory. Some work alongside you, their deep knowledge of local plants and weather patterns indispensable yet rarely acknowledged. And then there are the African people, forcibly brought across the ocean carrying the heaviest burdens of all. Their skills, languages, and cultural wisdom form the backbone of daily life, though history books will rarely record their names or contributions. Even if you consider yourself free, you're still a small cog in an enormous machine. Literacy is rare, information is controlled, and questioning the established order brings suspicious glances or worse. Knowledge is power, and power is jealously guarded. Lunchtime brings little relief from the day's demands. Your midday meal consists of coarse beans mixed with chunks of preserved meat or fat. The flavor is strong, sometimes rancid, but hunger makes it palatable enough. Salt is precious, used sparingly if at all. Your teeth ache from the tough, fibrous foods that make up your diet. There's little variety. The same staples appear day after day, with only seasonal fruits offering occasional relief from the monotony. You don't sit at a table for this meal. Instead, you find the smallest patch of shade available, crouching or sitting directly on the ground. Your eyes squint against the glare even in shadow, and flies circle persistently around your food and face. Looking down at your legs, you notice they're covered in red welts from insect bites. Some of these spots seem to be moving slightly under the skin, a sight that would have horrified you weeks ago but now just prompts a weary sigh and mental note to check them later. As the long afternoon stretches before you, The surrounding forest seems to press closer. You hear stories whispered among workers of people who vanished into the green expanse, some seeking escape from harsh conditions, others simply taken by the wilderness. This jungle doesn't forgive mistakes or weakness. Yet in this harsh ecosystem, the most dangerous predators aren't the jaguars or venomous snakes. They're the humans who enforce the colonial system, who arrive on ships from Lisbon with ledgers and orders. Yet amidst this brutality, you discover something unexpected: spiritual resilience that defies logic. In the evening, as work finally ends, songs begin to rise from different corners of the settlement. Melodies in languages you don't understand. These rhythms were born from pain but pulse with undeniable life. People gather in small groups to tell stories by firelight, their narratives weaving together Catholic saints with forest spirits, Portuguese folk tales with African deities and indigenous wisdom. This is how cultures survive when physical conditions threaten to break them, through memory, rhythm, faith, and community. The songs create a different kind of space, one that can't be claimed or controlled by colonial powers. As night falls, the air changes character. It cools slightly, bringing momentary relief from the day's heat but introducing new uncertainties. The sounds shift. Human voices recede as the chorus of frogs, insects, and nocturnal birds grows louder. You light a candle, its small flame creating more shadows than illumination. The darkness feels alive, moving with the flicker of your meager light. Through the wooden walls, you hear rustling, distant drums, perhaps the growl of a jaguar far off in the trees. Your sleeping space offers little comfort. The straw pokes through the canvas, creating new pressure points on your already sore body. Small creatures scurry in the corners of the room, rodents and insects that share your living quarters whether invited or not. You think of your own world, one with memory foam mattresses, temperature-controlled rooms, screens to keep insects at bay, and realize with startling clarity, the comforts you took for granted are unimaginable luxuries here. By now, any romantic notions about simpler times have thoroughly dissolved. This wasn't a golden age of discovery or adventure. It was, and is, a brutal test of human endurance, where merely surviving constitutes a significant achievement. The civilization brought by European powers came with a heavy price. Environmental destruction as forests were cleared for plantations, cultural erasure as indigenous languages were suppressed, and human suffering on an unimaginable scale. You thought Brazil was just colorful carnivals and soccer championships? In the 1600s, it was a chessboard where European empires moved their pieces. Portuguese, Dutch, and French forces constantly vied for control, with local populations caught in the crossfire. Forts and settlements changed hands like cards in a tavern game. Entire villages relocated at the whim of distant monarchs. The maps were redrawn repeatedly, borders shifting with each treaty signed across the Atlantic. And yet, out of this chaos, something remarkable began to form. Not by design, but through necessity and resistance. A new culture emerged in the spaces between official records and royal decrees, created by people whose names history would rarely record. Morning arrives again, and with it comes a revelation about survival. The people around you, from the grandmother weaving baskets while humming songs from her childhood, to the farmer who knows precisely when to plant by watching bird migrations, are all architects of the future. Their resilience, not the colonizers' conquest, is what truly shaped Brazil. In their daily choices to maintain traditions, to adapt rather than surrender, to create beauty even in harsh circumstances, they laid the foundations for a nation that wouldn't exist for centuries. You've gained a new perspective. You might not easily survive in colonial Brazil, not because you lack strength, but because the rules were fundamentally different. Time moved according to seasons and sunlight, not clocks and calendars. Everything, from preparing food to mending clothing, required skills developed over a lifetime. Nothing was instant or disposable. Tools were treasured possessions passed through generations, each with its own history and purpose. Faith wasn't confined to Sunday services but woven into every aspect of daily life. People prayed before planting seeds, while treating illnesses, during childbirth, and when facing storms. The spiritual and physical worlds weren't separate realms, but deeply interconnected. The morning meal preparation begins early. Women gather around cooking fires, sharing news and advice as they work. Cooking is communal, a time for passing down recipes that exist not in written form, but in memory and practice. The smell of wood smoke mingles with the aroma of beans simmering in clay pots. Cassava flour is mixed with water to form a simple dough that will become the day's bread. Nothing is measured with cups or spoons. Experienced hands know the right proportions by feel and sight. Children help by fetching water or grinding spices using mortars and pestles worn smooth by decades of use. They learn by watching and doing, their education practical rather than theoretical. By age 10, most can perform essential household tasks independently. The kitchen tools would seem primitive to you. No stainless steel or non-stick surfaces here. Cooking pots are made of fired clay, heavy and fragile. Knives require constant sharpening. Wooden spoons and bowls have been carved by hand, each slightly different from the next. Food preservation is a constant concern without refrigeration. Meat is salted, smoked or dried in the sun. Fish is cleaned and preserved the day it's caught. Fruits must be eaten quickly or transformed into jellies and preserves before they spoil in the heat. The colonial diet varies by social class and location. Near the coast, fish and seafood feature prominently. Inland, game meat and river fish provide protein. Throughout the colony, indigenous crops like cassava, corn, and beans form the foundation of most meals. You're surprised by the variety of fruits available, many you've never seen before. Guavas, passion fruit, and pineapples grow in abundance, their sweetness a welcome relief from the otherwise bland diet. These fruits aren't just food but medicine, used to treat various ailments. Herbs and spices grow in small gardens near kitchens. Their use is both culinary and medicinal. Women exchange cuttings and seeds, maintaining a living pharmacy of plants that can reduce fever, ease digestive problems, or help wounds heal. The Portuguese have introduced their culinary traditions, adapted to local ingredients. African cooking techniques transform humble ingredients into flavorful stews. Indigenous knowledge of native plants expands the larder beyond what European settlers could have imagined. This blending of culinary traditions happens naturally, born of necessity and proximity. A distinctly Brazilian cuisine is emerging, though no one calls it that yet. It's simply food, practical, available, and made delicious through skill and creativity despite limited resources. Daily routines follow the sun's path across the sky. You wake at first light, not to an alarm but to roosters crowing and the household stirring. There's no concept of sleeping in. Every daylight hour is precious for completing necessary tasks. The morning hours are for the heaviest work, before the sun reaches its zenith. Fields must be tended, water collected, animals fed. If you're lucky enough to be near a town, this might be when trading happens. Goods exchanged in the relative cool of early day. Midday brings a pause as the heat becomes unbearable. Those who can afford to rest during these hours do so, taking shelter from the sun. Work continues for many, though at a slower pace, with frequent breaks to drink water and catch one's breath. Late afternoon sees activity increase again as temperatures begin to drop. This is when women might gather to sew or weave together, when children receive religious instruction, when planning for the next day's work takes place. Evening brings the community together. Stories are told, music played on simple instruments, drums, flutes made from local reeds, stringed instruments with wooden bodies. These gatherings serve not just as entertainment, but as a way to preserve culture and history. Night falls early and completely. Without electricity, darkness is profound, relieved only by candles, oil lamps, or the moon when it's full. Most people retire soon after sunset, their bodies exhausted from the day's labor, ready to begin again at dawn. The weekly rhythm includes Sundays as days of rest and religious observance. Church services are mandatory, not optional. They serve as both spiritual practice and social gathering, one of the few times when the entire community assembles in one place. Seasonal changes dictate major shifts in activity. Planting and harvest times are community efforts, all hands working together to ensure food security. Rainy seasons limit some activities while enabling others, like collecting water for the drier months ahead. Yearly festivals mark important religious dates and agricultural milestones. These rare celebrations break the monotony of daily existence, allowing for joy and community bonding. They're eagerly anticipated, planned for months in advance. Personal hygiene looks nothing like your modern routine. Your morning doesn't begin with a shower. At most, you might splash water on your face from a basin. Bathing is a weekly event, not a daily one, and involves heating water over a fire and using it sparingly. Soap, when available, is harsh and rough on the skin, made from animal fat mixed with lye. More often, people use sand, plant materials, or simply water to remove the worst of the dirt. The concept of being truly clean, as you understand it, doesn't exist. Your teeth are cleaned with frayed twigs, rubbed against the enamel to remove food particles. There is no mint-flavored paste, no floss, no mouthwash. Dental problems are common and often excruciating, with few effective treatments available. Women's monthly cycles are managed with cloth rags that must be washed and reused. There are no disposable products, no pain relievers beyond herbal remedies that might or might not be effective. This natural process is made significantly more challenging by the conditions. Head lice are a constant companion for many, particularly children. Hours are spent combing through hair with fine-toothed combs, picking out the tiny parasites. Rather than being a source of shame, this is simply another routine maintenance task. Intestinal parasites are so common as to be considered normal. People periodically consume specific herbs known to help expel these unwanted guests. The connection between clean water, food handling, and these parasites isn't fully understood yet. Your clothing is limited to a few practical garments worn until they literally fall apart, then patched and worn again. The concept of fashion as you know it doesn't exist for most people. Clothing serves functional purposes: protection, modesty, and indication of social status. Women wear long dresses with multiple layers despite the heat. The fabrics are heavy, cotton, wool, or linen, none of the light, breathable synthetic blends you're accustomed to. Undergarments are minimal and uncomfortable by modern standards. Men's clothing consists of loose shirts and trousers or breeches, often with vests or jackets for more formal occasions. The quality of fabric and tailoring immediately identifies someone's social standing. Fine imported cloth is reserved for the elite. Footwear for those who can afford it consists of leather shoes or boots, rarely well fitted, causing blisters and calluses. Many people, particularly slaves and poor free laborers, go barefoot regardless of terrain or weather, their soles toughened by necessity. Clothing maintenance is a major undertaking. Washing clothes means hauling water, scrubbing fabrics on rocks or wooden boards, and laying items in the sun to dry. A task that takes you minutes with modern machines requires an entire day of physical labor here. Mending is done constantly, often in the evening by candlelight, straining eyes and fingers. Nothing is discarded if it can possibly be repaired. Children wear hand-me-downs that have been altered and restitched many times, bearing the history of previous wearers. Protection from insects comes not from repellent sprays but from smoke, certain plants rubbed on the skin, or simply endurance. The buzzing of mosquitoes is a constant soundtrack to your nights, their bites raising itchy welts across any exposed skin. The climate shapes everything about daily life. The heat is not just uncomfortable, it's a force that must be respected and accommodated. Work rhythms, clothing choices, architectural designs, and social customs all bend to its will. During the rainy season, mud becomes a dominant feature of existence. Paths turn to sticky morasses that pull at your feet with each step. Mold grows on everything: walls, furniture, clothing, requiring constant vigilance to keep it at bay. Humidity makes its presence known in countless ways: paper curls and warps. Metal tools rust overnight if not properly oiled. Wounds heal slowly, often becoming infected despite careful attention. Food spoils quickly, sometimes between morning harvest and evening meal. Storms in the tropics arrive with dramatic intensity. Rain doesn't just fall, it pounds the earth and wooden roofs with deafening force. Lightning turns night to day in blinding flashes, followed by thunder that shakes the walls of your dwelling. Between storms, the sun emerges with renewed strength, turning puddles to steam and creating a sauna-like atmosphere that makes breathing feel like drawing hot soup into your lungs. There is no respite, just different forms of climatic challenge. The colonial social structure is rigid, with clear boundaries between different groups. At the top are the Portuguese administrators and wealthy landowners, many of whom view their time in Brazil as temporary, a chance to build wealth before returning to Europe. Below them are merchants, skilled craftspeople, and minor officials, people with some education and means but limited power. They occupy an anxious middle ground, always aspiring to higher status while fearing a fall into the ranks of the poor. Free laborers of mixed heritage form another layer. People who are technically not enslaved but whose options are severely limited by both formal restrictions and social prejudice. Their status is precarious, dependent on the patronage of those above them. Indigenous peoples have been pushed from their ancestral lands, their populations decimated by European diseases against which they had no immunity. Those who survive navigate a transformed world where their deep knowledge of the land is both exploited and dismissed. African people brought by force to these shores maintain their dignity and cultural identity despite the most oppressive conditions. Their skills, spiritual practices, and community bonds form a foundation of resistance that will shape Brazilian culture for centuries to come. Women's lives are particularly constrained. Expected to be obedient to fathers and husbands, their legal rights are minimal. Yet in practice, many manage households, oversee domestic production, and maintain essential social connections that hold communities together. Children begin working as soon as they're physically able, usually around age 6 or 7. Their education, if any, focuses on practical skills and religious instruction. Childhood as a protected time of play and discovery is a luxury few can afford. Religious life in colonial Brazil is complex and syncretistic. Officially, Catholicism reigns supreme, brought by Portuguese colonizers and enforced by law. Churches stand prominently in settlements, their bells marking the hours and days, calling people to worship. The clergy wield significant influence, not just in spiritual matters but in education, record-keeping, and governance. Their approval or disapproval can determine someone's social standing and opportunities. Yet their control is never quite as complete as they might wish. African spiritual traditions continue despite prohibition, often disguised within Catholic practices. Deities from Yoruba and Bantu religions are associated with Christian saints. Prayers include words from African languages, and rituals maintain essential elements from across the Atlantic. Indigenous spiritual connections to the land, animals, and natural forces persist as well, blending with introduced beliefs to create practices unique to this time and place. Knowledge of medicinal plants maintains links to traditional healing methods and the spiritual worldview they represent. This religious blending happens not through formal decisions, but in the daily practices of people navigating a complex reality. It's born of necessity, creativity, and the human need to make sense of a challenging world through spiritual frameworks that feel true and meaningful. Formal education exists primarily for the elite. Boys from wealthy families might receive instruction in reading, writing, mathematics, and Latin, often from religious orders established for this purpose. Their education prepares them for roles in administration, commerce, or the church. Girls from similar backgrounds learn reading, basic arithmetic, music, and domestic management. Their education focuses on preparing them to run households and raise children according to their social station. Academic pursuits are generally discouraged as unnecessary or inappropriate. For most people, education is entirely practical, learning by doing under the guidance of parents, relatives, or masters. Knowledge is transmitted orally, through stories, songs, and direct instruction during work. Skills are developed through observation and practice. Despite these limitations, intellectual life finds ways to flourish. Books, though rare and expensive, circulate among the literate. Discussions of philosophy, politics, and science happen in private homes and religious institutions, though always with awareness of potential consequences. Languages blend and evolve as different populations interact. Portuguese begins to incorporate words from Tupi-Guarani languages and various African tongues. New expressions emerge to describe the unique features of life in this particular place and time. Music serves as both entertainment and cultural preservation. Portuguese folk songs adapt to local instruments and themes. African rhythms and melodic patterns influence everything they touch. Indigenous musical traditions contribute their own distinctive elements to this evolving soundscape. The instruments themselves tell stories of cultural exchange. Drums made from hollow logs with animal skins stretched across the openings carry echoes of both African and indigenous traditions. String instruments inspired by Portuguese models are constructed from local woods with distinctive tonal qualities. Dance becomes a form of expression where different traditions meet and transform each other. Movements that originated in religious ceremonies take on new contexts and meanings. Bodies communicate what words alone cannot, creating shared experiences across linguistic and social boundaries. Storytelling happens everywhere, around cooking fires, during work in the fields, as children are put to bed at night. These narratives preserve historical memory, transmit practical knowledge, reinforce moral values, and maintain connections to ancestral homelands many will never see. Folk medicine blends European humoral theory with African and indigenous healing practices. Plants are used not just for their chemical properties, but as part of spiritual healing systems. Illness is understood as potentially having both physical and supernatural causes. Healers hold important positions in communities. Their knowledge respected even by those who officially dismiss it as superstition. When official medicine offers bloodletting and purgatives, traditional remedies often provide more effective relief, though neither approach can address many serious conditions. Art appears in unexpected places. In the carving of a wooden spoon handle, the pattern woven into a basket, the arrangement of simple wildflowers in a clay cup. Beauty is created not as a luxury, but as an essential expression of humanity, a way of asserting dignity in difficult circumstances. More formal artistic traditions develop in religious contexts. Church interiors feature paintings, sculptures, and architectural elements that blend European Baroque styles with local sensibilities. These spaces become galleries where everyone, regardless of status, encounters visual art. The politics of colonial life extend far beyond official positions and policies. Every interaction carries political weight in a society where power differences are extreme and explicitly enforced. Daily life involves constant negotiation of these power dynamics. Information travels slowly but persistently through the colony. News from Portugal takes months to arrive by ship, often outdated by the time it reaches inland settlements. Local happenings spread through trade networks, religious gatherings, and the movement of people between communities. Resistance to colonial authority takes many forms, from open rebellion to subtle daily acts of noncompliance. People find ways to maintain autonomy within oppressive systems, creating spaces where alternative values and practices can survive and even flourish. You notice how people have developed coded languages and signals to communicate outside official channels. A particular arrangement of items in a market stall, specific patterns in clothing or beadwork, songs with double meanings, all convey messages to those who know how to interpret them. Decision-making happens at multiple levels. While official authority flows from the Portuguese crown through appointed administrators, communities maintain their own methods of resolving disputes and organizing collective efforts, often through councils of elders or respected figures. The economy operates both within and beyond official structures. Alongside the plantation system producing goods for export, local exchanges of food, crafts, and services create networks of reciprocity and mutual support that help communities weather hardships. You've been in colonial Brazil long enough now to recognize the profound difference between how systems are supposed to work on paper and how they actually function in practice. The gap between official rules and daily reality creates spaces where people assert their agency. As your time in this world continues, you develop a deeper appreciation for the ingenious ways people adapt to challenging circumstances. What initially looked like simple survival now reveals itself as a complex set of skills, knowledge, and social arrangements. You notice how mothers teach children to recognize dozens of plant species, explaining which can be eaten, which heal wounds, which repel insects. This botanical knowledge, passed through generations, represents a sophisticated science rarely acknowledged by European observers. You witness artisans creating tools perfectly suited to specific tasks. The angle of a blade, the length of a handle, the weight of a hammer, all carefully calibrated through years of experimentation and refinement. Their expertise combines materials science, ergonomics, and practical experience. The ways people predict weather patterns impress you, not through instruments but by observing subtle changes in animal behavior, cloud formations, or the feel of the air. This meteorological knowledge, essential for agricultural planning, comes from generations of careful observation. Communities have developed sophisticated water management systems, directing rainfall through channels to crops that need it most, storing it in natural depressions during wet seasons for use during dry periods. These engineering solutions use minimal materials with maximum efficiency. What European chronicles might dismiss as superstitions often contain practical wisdom encoded in metaphorical language. A spirit said to inhabit a particular river might keep people from bathing there during seasons when waterborne illness is most prevalent. You begin to see that survival in this environment requires not just physical endurance, but intellectual adaptability and social cooperation. The knowledge embedded in daily practices represents solutions to problems you never had to consider in your modern existence. The homes people create reveal much about how they've adapted to local conditions. Walls made from woven branches plastered with mud allow for airflow while providing structure. Roofs thatched with palm fronds shed rain effectively while insulating against both heat and the occasional cold night. Floors are often packed earth, swept daily and occasionally refreshed with new clay. This material remains cool even on hot days, providing relief when nothing else does. In some homes, sections of the floor are raised slightly to create sleeping platforms or storage areas. Windows are openings covered with wooden shutters, no glass, which is a rare luxury. These can be adjusted to manage airflow and light, closed completely during storms, or left open when weather permits. The lack of screens means constant negotiation with the insect world. Furniture is minimal and functional. Benches and stools rather than chairs with backs. Platforms for sleeping. Chests for storing the few precious possessions a family might own. Tables for preparing food or eating, though many meals are taken while sitting on mats on the floor. Storage is a constant challenge without refrigeration or airtight containers. Baskets woven from local fibers hang from rafters, keeping food away from rodents. Clay pots preserve grains and beans. Dried herbs and meat hang in bundles from ceiling beams, slowly curing in the smoke from cooking fires. Kitchens are often separate structures to reduce fire risk and keep main living areas cooler. Cooking happens over open fires or in clay ovens, requiring constant attention and skill to maintain proper temperatures without modern controls or thermometers. The objects that fill these homes tell stories of resourcefulness. Gourds become bowls, ladles, and water containers. Animal bones transform into needles, buttons, and tools. Nothing that might be useful is discarded. Everything is repurposed when its original function ends. Textiles are precious, created through labor-intensive processes. Cotton grown, harvested, spun, and woven by hand, or wool sheared, cleaned, carded, spun, and woven into fabric. Each step requires specific knowledge and tools, most of which are themselves handmade. Lighting comes from tallow candles or simple oil lamps that produce more smoke than illumination. The rhythms of life adjust to natural light, with most activity happening during daylight hours. Nights are for rest, storytelling, and necessary tasks that can be done by touch and memory. Water must be carried from rivers or wells, often across significant distances. This essential task, usually assigned to women and children, shapes daily schedules and physical development. The strength required to transport enough water for a household's needs is considerable. Despite these material limitations, homes become expressions of identity and creativity. Walls might be decorated with natural pigments in geometric patterns. Doorways adorned with protective symbols. Even the humblest dwelling contains elements that go beyond mere functionality. You notice that household spaces are organized to facilitate social connections. Work areas allow for conversation, while tasks are completed. Sleeping areas provide what privacy is possible, while maximizing limited space. Everything encourages the cooperation necessary for survival. The concept of private space differs significantly from what you're accustomed to. Multiple generations share sleeping quarters. Conversations happen without expectation of confidentiality. Personal thoughts and feelings find expression through coded language, music, or private ritual rather than physical separation. As you spend more time in colonial Brazil, your senses adapt and sharpen. You begin to distinguish between types of bird calls, to smell approaching rain before it falls, to feel subtle temperature changes that signal weather shifts. Your body is learning this place in ways your mind can hardly articulate. You develop calluses where tools rest in your hands, muscles shaped by specific repeated movements. Your skin darkens from sun exposure, despite efforts to stay in shade. Your digestive system gradually adjusts to unfamiliar foods and microbes. Your very body is being rewritten by this environment. Time itself feels different. Without clocks or calendars dictating your schedule, you measure days by the sun's position, weeks by market days or religious services, seasons by flowering plants or migrating birds. This natural timekeeping connects you more deeply to the world around you. You find yourself noticing details you would have missed before. How ants moving in a particular direction often signal approaching rain. How certain plants close their leaves before storms. How the quality of light in late afternoon tells you what tomorrow's weather might bring. The night sky becomes a familiar map overhead, stars tracking the passage of seasons more reliably than any calendar. You learn to find your way by starlight when necessary, to read time from the position of constellations, to recognize patterns that have guided travelers for centuries. Your relationship with animals changes profoundly. Livestock aren't just sources of food, but co-laborers and companions. You come to know individual chickens by their behavior patterns, to anticipate when a horse needs rest before it shows obvious signs of fatigue, to read emotional states in creatures you once thought incapable of such complexity. The sounds around you form a constant symphony that your ears learn to decode. The particular buzz of mosquitoes that carry disease versus those that are merely annoying. The difference between the rustle of a harmless lizard in dry leaves and the more purposeful movement of a snake. The specific tone of human voices that indicates trouble brewing. Smells become information rather than just sensations. The metallic scent before a storm. The subtle difference between fruit that's perfectly ripe and fruit that's begun to ferment. The smell of smoke that signals cooking versus the sharper scent of a forest fire. Your nose becomes a sophisticated analytical tool. Touch develops new sensitivity as well. Your fingers can detect the readiness of beans by their firmness, the quality of fabric by its weave, the health of livestock by the condition of their coat. This tactile knowledge can't be written in books, but becomes essential to daily survival. You discover that your modern education, however extensive, has significant gaps when it comes to practical knowledge. The people around you, many unable to read or write, possess encyclopedic understanding of their environment, developed through direct experience and communal wisdom. They can predict weather patterns without instruments, navigate without maps, identify hundreds of plants and their uses, track animals across seemingly featureless terrain, and construct sturdy shelters from available materials. These skills, unrecognized by formal educational systems, represent sophisticated scientific knowledge. The food production system surrounds you with constant activity. Fields require attention through all stages of growth: clearing land, preparing soil, planting seeds, managing water, removing competing plants, deterring pests, and finally harvesting. Each crop has its own calendar and specific needs. Sugarcane dominates many coastal areas, its processing requiring specialized equipment and considerable labor. The sweet juice is extracted, boiled, and processed in a carefully orchestrated sequence that transforms raw cane into the valuable commodity that drives the colonial economy. Manioc, a staple food crop, requires complex processing to remove naturally occurring cyanide compounds. The knowledge of how to transform this potentially dangerous plant into nutritious flour represents generations of indigenous experimentation and observation, a scientific achievement rarely acknowledged as such. Fishing involves intimate knowledge of tides, currents, fish behavior, and weather patterns. Different techniques are employed depending on the species sought and seasonal conditions. The construction of nets, traps, and boats represents specialized technological knowledge adapted to local conditions. Hunting similarly requires understanding animal habits, tracking skills, knowledge of appropriate weapons for different prey, and techniques for preserving meat in a tropical climate. These activities are governed by practical experience rather than written manuals, with knowledge transmitted through demonstration and practice. Food preservation techniques become particularly impressive when you consider the lack of refrigeration. Smoking, salting, drying, fermenting, and pickling allow communities to store seasonal abundance for leaner times. Each method represents a sophisticated understanding of how to inhibit spoilage in challenging conditions. The preservation of seeds from one growing season to the next involves careful selection, storage, and protection from insects and moisture. This practice, essential for food security, incorporates understanding of genetics and heredity long before these concepts were formally articulated in scientific literature. Medicine in colonial Brazil blends multiple traditions with varying degrees of effectiveness. European approaches based on humoral theory, Balancing blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile often involve bloodletting, purging, and other interventions that may do more harm than good. Indigenous medical knowledge developed over thousands of years includes extensive pharmacological understanding of local plants. Treatments are often effective for specific conditions, though the theoretical framework explaining why they work differs from modern scientific explanations. African healing traditions brought across the Atlantic include both physical remedies and spiritual practices, addressing what we might now call psychological aspects of well-being. These approaches recognize connections between emotional states and physical health in ways that anticipate much later medical understanding. Practical nurses, often women without formal training, develop empirical knowledge about what helps and what hurts. Their hands-on experience with wounds, childbirth, common illnesses, and injuries makes them essential healthcare providers in communities with no access to university-trained physicians. Childbirth happens at home with the assistance of experienced women. Their knowledge of how to position mothers for easier delivery, herbs that might speed labor or reduce bleeding, and techniques for handling complications represent sophisticated obstetrical practice developed through careful observation and communal learning. Mental health conditions are understood primarily through religious or spiritual frameworks, rather than medical ones. What we might now recognize as depression, anxiety, or trauma responses might be interpreted as spiritual afflictions requiring prayer, ritual intervention, or community support rather than medical treatment. The technologies that surround you may seem primitive at first glance, but closer examination reveals their sophistication. Tools are perfectly adapted to specific tasks and local materials. Techniques for working with wood, fiber, clay, and metal have been refined over generations to maximize efficiency with minimal resources. Water management systems channel rainfall from roofs into storage containers, direct streams to fields needing irrigation, and protect settlements from flooding. These engineering solutions use gravity and natural materials to create sustainable infrastructure requiring minimal maintenance. Agricultural tools reflect deep understanding of soil conditions, crop requirements, and human biomechanics. Their designs have evolved through countless iterations to find optimal forms for specific tasks, a process not unlike modern product development but extended over much longer timeframes. Building techniques utilize local materials in ways that respond to climate challenges. Walls breathe in humid conditions to prevent mold. Roof designs shed heavy tropical rainfall while providing shade. Foundations adapt to local soil conditions. These architectural solutions represent accumulated environmental knowledge. Transportation relies primarily on human and animal power, with rivers and coastal waters providing natural highways. Boats and canoes designed for specific waterways demonstrate sophisticated understanding of hydrodynamics, achieved through experiential learning rather than mathematical modeling. Energy comes directly from human and animal muscle, flowing water, wind, and burning biomass. Without fossil fuels or electricity, all activities must operate within the energy budget provided by renewable sources. This necessity fosters remarkable efficiency in resource use. The absence of instant communication means information travels at the speed of the fastest available transportation: horseback, sailing ship, or human messenger. News from Europe might take months to reach colonial outposts. This creates information ecosystems that are both isolated and highly local. Despite these technological limitations, or perhaps because of them, communities develop remarkable resilience. When tools break, they're repaired rather than replaced. When crops fail, alternative food sources are identified. When weather disrupts plans, activities adapt. This flexibility proves more sustainable than many modern systems. The markets where goods are exchanged offer windows into colonial economics. Unlike the standardized retail experiences you're accustomed to, these spaces operate through personal relationships, reputation, and negotiation. Prices fluctuate based on season, availability, and individual circumstances. Currency exists but isn't always necessary. Barter systems allow direct exchange of goods and services. Credit arrangements depend on trust and community standing rather than formal banking institutions. Gift economies operate alongside commercial transactions, particularly within family networks and close-knit communities. Value is determined differently than in your world. Objects worth keeping are those that serve essential functions, last through years of use, and can be repaired when damaged. Disposability is an alien concept. Everything is used until it cannot possibly serve any purpose, then transformed into something else. Labor is organized through various systems, some extremely coercive, others more collaborative. Enslaved people perform the most physically demanding and dangerous work under threat of violence. Free laborers negotiate conditions with varying degrees of agency depending on their social status and available alternatives. Cooperative work arrangements emerge for tasks requiring many hands. Barn raisings, harvests, land clearing. These occasions combine labor with social bonding, often including shared meals, music, and celebration upon completion. They create and reinforce community ties while accomplishing necessary work. The household serves as the basic economic unit for most people. Family-based production meets many needs directly rather than through market exchange. Clothing, food, tools, and furniture are produced within the home or obtained through local trading networks rather than purchased from commercial enterprises. Children's economic contributions begin early, with responsibilities increasing gradually with age and ability. By their early teens, young people perform adult work while still learning more specialized skills. This integration into productive activity shapes their understanding of their place in the world. For women, economic activity centers around but isn't limited to domestic production. Food processing, textile creation, poultry raising, gardening, and craft manufacturing generate essential goods for both household use and exchange. This labor, though often undervalued in official records, is fundamental to colonial survival. Throughout your time in colonial Brazil, language barriers create both challenges and opportunities for cultural exchange. Portuguese serves as the official language, but in practice, communication happens through complex linguistic blending as different populations interact. Indigenous languages, particularly Tupi-Guarani tongues along the coast, influence place names, botanical terminology, and everyday vocabulary. Words for local plants, animals, and geographical features often retain their original indigenous names, entering Portuguese through practical necessity. African languages, particularly those from West and Central Africa, contribute terminology related to food, music, religious concepts, and daily life. These linguistic elements persist despite deliberate efforts to suppress cultural expressions from enslaved populations. Creole languages emerge in some regions, combining elements of European, African, and indigenous languages into new communication systems. These evolving tongues reflect the realities of colonial life more accurately than any of their parent languages could alone. Nonverbal communication becomes extremely important across language barriers. Gestures, facial expressions, demonstrations, and visual symbols create shared understanding when words fail. You find yourself becoming fluent in these physical languages out of necessity. Multilingualism is common, with many people speaking 2, 3, or more languages with varying degrees of fluency. This linguistic adaptability, rarely acknowledged as a form of intelligence by colonial authorities, enables survival and cooperation in complex social environments. Religious life permeates every aspect of colonial existence. The church calendar structures the year through saints' days, fasts, and festivals. Religious authorities maintain records of births, marriages, and deaths, establishing official identity within the colonial system. For many, spiritual practice provides one of the few spaces where personal agency can be expressed. Through prayer, ritual, music, and community gathering, people create meaning and purpose despite oppressive conditions. Faith offers both psychological comfort and practical social support. Indigenous spiritual traditions, though officially suppressed, continue in adapted forms. Connections to sacred landscapes, ancestral presences, and non-human beings persist, often hidden within ostensibly Catholic practices or maintained in remote areas beyond colonial surveillance. African religious systems similarly endure through strategic adaptation. Yoruba orixas are associated with Catholic saints, allowing worship to continue under new names. Rituals incorporate Catholic elements while maintaining essential spiritual principles from across the Atlantic. Syncretic religious practices emerge not as deliberate theological projects but as practical solutions to living between worlds. These blended spiritualities reflect the creative resilience of people maintaining connection to ancestral wisdom while navigating new cultural terrain. Formal religious instruction often emphasizes obedience to authority, both divine and temporal. Yet the same texts and teachings can inspire liberation theology, with concepts of human dignity and divine justice, providing frameworks for resistance to oppression. Your understanding of time transforms during your sojourn in colonial Brazil. Without clocks dividing the day into standardized units, time becomes more fluid, measured by tasks completed rather than hours passed. Morning might mean the period from dawn until the day's heat becomes unbearable rather than a specific number of hours. Seasons rather than months organize the annual cycle. The rainy season, the dry season, the planting time, the harvest. These natural divisions shape activities more powerfully than calendar dates. Plant and animal behavior serve as reliable indicators for when to plant, harvest, or prepare for weather changes. Age is similarly imprecise. Few people know their exact birth date. Life stages matter more than numerical age. Childhood, youth, adulthood, elderhood, with transitions marked by physical development, skill acquisition, and social recognition, rather than birthdays. This different relationship with time affects how people think about the future. Planning happens in terms of seasons and generations rather than 5-year plans or retirement accounts. Seeds are saved with next year's planting in mind. Children are taught skills they'll need as adults. Trees are planted for future generations to harvest. The past exists primarily through oral history rather than written records for most people. Stories about ancestors, significant events, and community origins are carefully preserved and transmitted. This history lives in memory, song, and repeated telling rather than in documents accessible only to the literate. Your perception of distance also changes. Without cars or paved roads, travel happens at human or animal speed through challenging terrain. A journey of 20 miles might represent a significant expedition requiring preparation and exposing travelers to various hazards along the way. Maps exist but are incomplete and inaccurate by modern standards. Navigation relies more on landmark recognition, environmental cues, and local knowledge than on cartographic representation. Mental maps developed through direct experience prove more reliable than paper documents created by distant authorities. Social relationships take on different dimensions in this world. Without telephones, text messages, or social media, all interaction happens face-to-face or through written messages that might take weeks to reach their recipients. This creates both limitations and depths of connection unfamiliar to your modern sensibilities. Community becomes not just a pleasant concept, but an essential survival strategy. No individual or single family can produce everything needed for survival. Interdependence is acknowledged and cultivated through reciprocal relationships, shared labor, and mutual support systems that cross some social boundaries while respecting others. Family extends beyond the nuclear unit to include multiple generations and various degrees of kinship. Households often contain grandparents, parents, children, unmarried relatives, and sometimes non-related individuals incorporated through formal or informal adoption practices. These extended families provide economic security and social support. For enslaved people forcibly separated from blood relatives, alternative kinship networks develop. Spiritual parenthood, age group bonds, shared linguistic or cultural origins, and relationships formed through shared experience create family-like structures that offer crucial emotional and practical support. Friendships develop through shared work, religious participation, and proximity. These bonds often include practical dimensions, tool sharing, labor exchange, childcare cooperation, alongside emotional connection. The distinction between friend and neighbor blurs when daily survival depends on mutual assistance. Social gatherings serve multiple purposes beyond simple enjoyment. They reinforce community bonds, provide opportunities for information exchange, allow young people to meet potential partners under community supervision, and maintain cultural practices that might otherwise be lost. Courtship and marriage follow different patterns depending on social position. For elite families, marriages represent strategic alliances, with partners often selected by parents with minimal input from the young people involved. Property considerations and family connections outweigh personal preference. For those of more modest means, practical considerations still influence marriage choices. but personal compatibility plays a greater role. The ability to work well together, complementary skills, and mutual respect often matter more than romantic attachment in a world where marriage is primarily an economic partnership. For enslaved people, stable partnerships face institutional obstacles, as partners can be sold separately without regard for family bonds. Despite these challenges, people form committed relationships, create family units when possible, and maintain connections even across forced separations. As your time in colonial Brazil extends, you develop a deeper appreciation for the wisdom embedded in practices that initially seemed primitive or superstitious. You recognize that what anthropologists might later call traditional ecological knowledge represents sophisticated understanding of environmental relationships, developed through generations of careful observation. The agricultural techniques that work with rather than against local conditions, intercropping, natural pest management, soil conservation, represent sustainable approaches that modern industrial farming would later abandon at great environmental cost. Building methods using local materials and designs adapted to regional climate conditions demonstrate practical understanding of thermal dynamics, moisture management, and structural engineering principles, achieved through experiential learning rather than formal study. Food preservation techniques relying on fermentation, smoking, drying, and salting reflect sophisticated microbial management developed long before germ theory provided scientific explanation for why these methods work. Medical practices incorporating plant-based remedies, physical therapies, and psychological support often achieve results comparable to, or better than, the bleeding, purging, and mercury treatments favored by formally trained European physicians of the period. You realize that modern progress has sometimes meant loss as well as gain. Traditional knowledge systems discarded as unscientific often contained valuable insights developed through centuries of careful observation and experimentation, validated by practical results rather than controlled studies. The resilience of colonial communities impresses you more as time passes. Without insurance policies, government assistance programs, or corporate supply chains, people develop robust strategies for managing risk and responding to disasters, both natural and human-made. Seed saving preserves genetic diversity and adaptation to local conditions, providing insurance against crop failure. Multiple food sources, cultivated fields, kitchen gardens, foraged plants, hunted game, domesticated animals, create redundancy that protects against hunger when any single source fails. Strong social networks ensure that those experiencing temporary hardship receive support from community members, with the understanding that roles may reverse when circumstances change. This mutual aid system functions without formal organizations or bureaucratic processes. Skills diversity within communities means that essential knowledge doesn't disappear with any single individual. Multiple people know how to set bones, deliver babies, track game, predict weather, or construct shelters. This distributed expertise creates resilience against knowledge loss. You come to understand that what might look like inefficiency to modernize, multiple small-scale producers rather than large specialized operations, seemingly excessive labor investment in individual items, apparent duplication of efforts across households, actually creates systems less vulnerable to cascading failure. The history you witness firsthand differs significantly from what you learned in textbooks. Those accounts focused on governors, battles, and official policies. The lived reality reveals how ordinary people navigated, resisted, and sometimes transformed those official structures through daily actions and choices. You see how indigenous communities maintain cultural continuity despite enormous pressure to abandon their ways of life. Knowledge is preserved through stories, ceremonies performed in secret, children taught traditional skills alongside those required by colonial authorities, and strategic adaptation that protects core values while appearing to comply with external demands. You witness how enslaved African people create cultural spaces through music, dance, religious practice, and communal gathering. These expressions aren't simply entertainments, but vehicles for maintaining identity, passing knowledge between generations, and asserting humanity in a system designed to deny it. You observe how women's work, often invisible in official records, creates and maintains the social fabric essential for community survival. Through food production and distribution, healthcare provision, textile creation, child rearing, and conflict mediation. Women exercise forms of power rarely acknowledged in formal political structures. You notice how resistant the written record is to capturing these realities. Official documents reflect the perspectives and priorities of those with power to create them. The lived experiences of the majority leave traces primarily in oral traditions, material culture, and the persistent practices that shape daily life. As your journey through colonial Brazil nears its end, you reflect on how this experience has transformed your understanding, not just of history, but of human capacity for both cruelty and resilience. You've witnessed systems of exploitation built on racial categorization and resource extraction that caused immense suffering. Yet alongside these harsh realities, you've observed the extraordinary creativity with which people create meaning, maintain dignity, and build community even in the most challenging circumstances. This capacity for cultural and spiritual resilience in the face of oppression leaves you with complicated feelings, sorrow for the suffering and admiration for the resistance. You understand now that Brazil wasn't discovered by Europeans. It was inhabited by sophisticated societies with deep knowledge of the land, complex social structures, and rich cultural traditions. The colonial project didn't bring civilization to an empty wilderness but imposed new systems on existing ones, with mixed and often tragic results. You recognize that the distinctive Brazilian culture that would eventually emerge wasn't a simple transplantation of European ways, but a complex synthesis created largely by those with the least official power, indigenous peoples maintaining their connection to the land, Africans preserving their spiritual traditions, and those of mixed heritage navigating between worlds. As you prepare to return to your own time, you carry with you a profound appreciation for the ingenuity, adaptability, and sheer determination of ordinary people who lived, loved, and created meaning in circumstances you found challenging even temporarily. Their unremarkable daily choices, accumulated over generations, shaped a nation in ways no royal decree could match. You know now that you wouldn't easily survive in colonial Brazil, not because you lack intelligence or strength, but because survival here requires specific knowledge, skills, and social connections developed over a lifetime. The people around you aren't living simple lives but navigating complex systems with sophisticated tools, both material and cultural. Your brief immersion in this world has given you a new lens through which to view your own. You notice how many of your needs are actually preferences shaped by your particular time and place. You recognize how many conveniences you've taken for granted. Clean water from a tap, light at the touch of a switch, information available instantly. You find yourself wondering about the hidden costs of modern comfort. Environmental impacts, social disconnection, loss of practical skills and direct experience. While you wouldn't choose to remain permanently in the 17th century, you question whether every change since then represents true progress. Most importantly, you leave with deeper respect for the anonymous millions whose names don't appear in history books but whose daily choices, cultural persistence, and quiet resistance shaped the world we inhabit today. Their legacy lives not just in museums and monuments but in cooking techniques, musical rhythms, spiritual practices, and ways of relating to the land that continue to evolve in modern Brazil. As you step back into your own time, you carry with you not just knowledge about colonial Brazil, but wisdom about human adaptability, the importance of community resilience, and the power of cultural creativity in the face of oppression. These insights transcend their historical context, offering guidance for navigating our own uncertain future with grace and determination. If this journey through heat, hunger, and history made you rethink everything you thought you knew about colonial Brazil, leave a like to honor those who survived what we couldn't even imagine. Subscribe for more stories that peel back the layers of the past without the sugarcoating. And tell me in the comments, would you survive even one night with no soap, no rights, and no way out? I'll be reading from the comfort of the 21st century.